Papa, when is Mama coming home?
I release you from your convenience. Pi. S.
The letter was on his desk at precisely 7 in the morning. Penwith had placed it there himself, which was unusual. Aldrich Voss, Duke of Caermont, received his correspondence at the breakfast table, sorted by urgency and arranged left to right by the under-butler, who had done so every morning for 11 years without variation. This letter had not come through the post. It had no seal. It had no address. It was a single folded sheet of cream paper, the kind Sarin kept in the drawer of her writing desk in the east sitting room, and it had been placed at the center of his desk, with the precision of a woman who does things exactly as she intends them. Penwith stood at the door when Aldrich entered the study. He did not leave. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Penwith had perfected the art of vanishing from rooms before they became uncomfortable. If he was still standing in the doorway with his hands at his sides and his face arranged in the expression of a man bracing for something, it meant he had already read the letter, or had been asked to witness the placing of it, or both. Aldrich picked it up. He unfolded it. There were 8 words. That was all. 8 words in Sarin's handwriting, which was neat and unhurried even at the best of times, and was now, this morning, whatever morning this had been when she sat down to write it, more unhurried than usual, as though she had taken considerable care with every letter. I release you from your convenience. S. He read it twice. He set it down. He looked at Penwith. Where is she? Her Grace departed at 5 this morning, Your Grace. Penwith's voice was even. She took 1 trunk, Lady Crispin's traveling bag and Miss Orvine. The carriage was called for 4:30. She did not wake the house. Crispin is with her? No, Your Grace. Lady Crispin's bag was packed but not taken. He is in the nursery. He is not yet aware. A pause. Her Grace left additional instructions with Miss Orvine regarding his routine. He is to be told only that she is visiting her mother and will write. Aldrich looked down at the letter. 8 words. Then he looked up at the high window above his desk, where the March light was coming in gray and flat over the north lawns of Caermont, and the estate that he had rebuilt from near ruin over 12 years of careful, relentless work was perfectly, absolutely still. She is at Lady Thalwick's house in Bath, he said. It was not a question. I believe so, Your Grace. He picked up the letter once more. Read it a 3rd time. I release you from your convenience. He had said it 3 weeks ago, at the Pempton dinner. He had not said it to Sarin. He had said it to Lord Ashfield and 3 other men in the withdrawing room after supper. When Ashfield had asked, with the particular curiosity of a man who finds other men's domestic arrangements endlessly entertaining, how it was that Aldrich, who had always sworn he had no interest in marriage, had come to wed the youngest Thalwick girl, he had answered without particular thought, the way a man answers a question that does not seem to require thought. She was the most convenient option available at the time. Sensible choice. There had been laughter. Ashfield had raised his glass. The conversation had moved on within 30 seconds. 3 weeks later, Sarin had left 8 words on his desk, and the March light was gray over the lawns, and the house was wrong in a way he could not immediately name. Only feel, the way you feel a room from which all the furniture has been removed. Not empty exactly, but wrong. Structurally intact and functionally hollow. He had said she was convenient. He had meant it. He had not understood until this moment, holding her 8 words in a house that was already beginning to sound different, that he had meant the wrong thing entirely, and that the word, once released into a room full of people who knew her name, could never be unspoken. Penwith was still at the door. Will there be anything, Your Grace? Aldrich set the letter down flat on the desk. He straightened it. He aligned its edge with the corner of the blotter. Breakfast, he said, and coffee, and have someone see to the east sitting room. The east sitting room, Your Grace? Yes. He did not explain. He did not know how to explain that he had walked past that room every morning for 4 years without once going in, and that he felt, now, with particular and inexplicable certainty, that he needed to see it while it still held the arrangement of her things. Penwith withdrew. Aldrich stood at the desk for another moment. Then he walked out of the study and down the corridor and opened the door of the east sitting room. Her writing desk was cleared. The inkwell was capped. The stack of letters she had been drafting for the tenant committee, he had seen it there Thursday, had passed it in the hall without stopping, was gone. The small vase of dried winter stems she had kept on the corner of the desk, the ones she replaced every 3 weeks, the ones he had never asked the origin of, was still there. She had not taken that. He did not know if that meant she intended to return, or if it meant it had simply not occurred to her to take it, or if it meant she had left it on purpose, a kind of marker, a period at the end of a sentence. He stood in the east sitting room for 4 minutes. He was counting, without deciding to count, the way he counted everything. Then he went to breakfast. But he did not stop thinking about those 8 words, and he did not stop thinking about the vase. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to Duke Royal Tales, the home of the finest Duke romance stories on YouTube. Every week we bring you emotionally rich, beautifully told stories of love, pride, and the extraordinary cost of learning too late. If this story already has you, and we think it does, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. This is one you will want to follow from beginning to end. Now, back to Aldrich, back to Caermont, back to the 8 words sitting flat on the desk, and to the woman who wrote them. 3 weeks before the letter, there had been a dinner. The Pempton estate was 12 miles from Caermont. Lord and Lady Pempton hosted 4 dinners a year of consequence, and this had been the March one, attended by 14 couples and 4 unattached gentlemen and a great deal of very good claret. Sarin had sat at the far end of the table from Aldrich, as was customary at large dinners, and she had been, as she always was in company, quiet in a way that was not shyness. It was the quietness of a person who is listening carefully and choosing not to perform. She had been placed between Lord Ashfield's wife and a Mrs. Porthen, and she had spent the better part of the evening asking the latter about her youngest daughter's upcoming season, which was, Mrs. Porthen would later tell Lady Pempton in the carriage home, the most thorough and genuine interest she had been shown at a dinner table in 3 years. Sarin had written the girl's name in her memory, and the following morning had composed a letter to Mrs. Porthen with the name of a particularly good modiste and the address of a dressmaker in the city who owed Caermont a favor. She had not told Aldrich she sent the letter. It was not the kind of thing she mentioned. In the withdrawing room after supper, while the women took tea and the men took port, Lord Ashfield had asked his question. And Aldrich, standing with his port glass, comfortable in the company of men who admired his efficiency and found his candor refreshing, had answered it. She was the most convenient option available at the time, sensible choice. Mrs. Porthen had been passing the withdrawing room door at that moment, returning from the cloakroom. She had heard it through the gap. She had not intended to hear it. But she had heard it, and she was not a woman who forgot things she had heard, and she was not, to her credit or to her detriment, depending on one's view, a woman who kept such things to herself when she sat across from a woman she had just spent an evening genuinely liking. She had not told Sarin at once. She had considered it for a full week. Then, at a small afternoon gathering the following Sunday, she had drawn Sarin aside, her face composed and cautious, and said, "I hope I am not the bearer of something that causes you pain, but I think I would like to know, and I believe you are the kind of woman who would wish to know as well." She had relayed what she had heard, word for word, because she had remembered it exactly. Sarin had thanked her. She had thanked her with the same warmth and attention she gave to everything, without any visible fracture in her composure. And Mrs. Porthen had left the gathering feeling she had done the right thing and also feeling very sorry for the Duchess of Caermont, in a way she could not entirely articulate. Sarin had said nothing to Aldrich that evening. She had said nothing the following day, or the day after. She had written 6 letters for the tenant committee, and signed them in Aldrich's name as she usually did, had met with the Caermont housekeeper about the spring linen inventory, had read to Crispin for an hour before bed, and told him the story of the fisherman and the tide, which was his favorite because it had a dog in it, and had sat in the east sitting room long after the house had gone to sleep. She had sat for a long time in that room. She had asked herself only one question, the same question she turned over and over in the quiet, not whether he had meant it, but whether she was surprised that he had. And the answer, the honest answer she owed herself, sitting alone in the east sitting room of the estate she had spent 4 years building into something worth inheriting, was no. She was not surprised. That was the devastating part, not the word, the fact that it fit so precisely, the fact that it settled over the 4 years of their marriage without wrinkling, the way a dust cloth settles over furniture that has not been moved, perfectly, completely, as though made for the shape of it. She had been convenient. She knew it. She had known it on their wedding morning. She had chosen to love him anyway, quietly, the way she chose most things, without making the choice loud enough to demand acknowledgement. She had chosen to love him, and to build the estate, and to raise Crispin, and to manage the correspondence, and to plant the courtyard garden with the lavender he walked past every morning without noticing, and to make herself indispensable in the hope that indispensability would eventually look like love from both sides. It had not. She had packed over the course of 2 evenings, carefully, while Aldrich was in his study with the estate ledgers. 1 trunk. She did not take the things that were Caermont's. She took only what was entirely hers. Her books, her mother's brooch, the watercolor she had painted herself the summer before Crispin was born, a pair of gloves she had bought with her own money in Bath. She wrote the letter on the Tuesday evening, after Crispin was asleep, at the writing desk in the east sitting room, with the small vase of dried stems at her elbow. She wrote it in 1 draft. She did not revise it. She had said what there was to say. She rose at 4:30 on Wednesday morning. She dressed without ringing for her maid. She looked in on Crispin, stood at the door of the nursery for perhaps 30 seconds, and did not go in, because she could not trust herself to go in without waking him, and she could not trust herself to wake him and still leave. She placed the letter on the desk in the study. She let herself out of the side entrance. The carriage was waiting on the service road. She did not look back at the house. She had not needed to. She had the whole of it in her memory, every corridor, every stone, every room she had filled with the work of herself, quietly and without being asked, and without ever receiving the word that would have made it mean something other than convenient. By the time the March light came gray over the north lawns and Penwith found the letter, Sarin was 2 hours down the road to Bath, and she was, for the first time in 4 years, entirely quiet in herself, not peaceful, not relieved, only quiet, the way a room is quiet when the clock in it has finally been stopped. What Aldrich discovered in the first fortnight was this. He had not understood the shape of what she did, because he had confused the results of her work with the presence of furniture. The estate had run. The letters had been answered. The tenants had been visited. The dinners had been arranged, and the social obligations had been met, and Crispin's schedule had been maintained with a regularity that produced a child who slept well and ate reasonably, and only occasionally refused to wear his boots. All of this had existed in Aldrich's mind as the natural condition of things. He understood very quickly that it was not. The first letter that went unanswered was from the chair of the Winter Tenant Fund, asking for confirmation of the spring allocation meeting. Aldrich found it on his desk 11 days after Sarin left. He had not seen it before because it had been placed in the household correspondence tray, which Sarin managed, and he had not thought to look in that tray since it had never, in 4 years, required his attention. He read it. He did not know what the spring allocation meeting was. He did not know there was a tenant fund. He knew, vaguely, that coal and supplies had been distributed to the Caermont farms each winter, but he had not known it was organized through a fund that Sarin had established in the first year of their marriage and managed personally ever since. He found the fund ledger in her writing desk drawer, 3 years of accounts in her handwriting, meticulous and annotated, with small marginal notes in pencil that were not accounting entries but observations. Hartwell family, new infant, increase allocation by half in Northfield cottages, roof completed, reduce fuel estimate in Dreen Farm, children out of school, speak to steward. He sat with the ledger for a long time. Then there was the matter of political correspondence. 2 letters from the county members whose campaigns Aldrich had agreed to support. Agreements brokered, he now discovered, through a series of quiet social maneuvers Sarin had conducted over the preceding 18 months, securing goodwill and access through invitations and careful conversation at precisely the right dinners. Without her managing the response letters, the correspondence went cold. One of the members sent a note directly to Aldrich expressing concern. Aldrich's reply was technically correct and entirely wrong in tone, and he knew it as he sealed it. And then there was Crispin. Crispin was told, as Sarin had instructed, that his mother was visiting his grandmother and would write. She had written. A letter arrived 3 days after she left, small and warm and addressed in her particular hand, and Miss Orvine read it to Crispin twice and then let him hold it. He carried it to breakfast the first morning and placed it beside his plate and did not eat his eggs until Miss Orvine confirmed the letter could stay on the table. He did not cry. He was 5 years old and a composed child, composed in the particular way of children who have watched a composed parent and learned, without being taught, to take their cues from the steadiest person in the room. But in the evenings, when Aldrich came to say goodnight as Sarin had asked him to continue doing in her note to Miss Orvine. A note that was, Aldrich observed, more detailed and thoughtful than any set of domestic instructions he had ever composed. Crispin would ask, not every night, but often enough, in the flat, direct way of a child whose curiosity has not yet learned to be diplomatic. "Papa, when is Mama coming home?" Aldrich answered truthfully. He said he did not know yet. Crispin accepted this. He was, Aldrich was learning, a child who accepted honest answers and was troubled by evasions he could feel but could not name. He had Sarin's way of listening to a sentence beneath the sentence that was being spoken. Aldrich had not noticed that before. He noticed it now. He was beginning to notice a great many things now. Penwith said very little during this period. He managed the household with his customary precision and made no comment on the absence of the Duchess beyond what was operationally necessary. But on the 16th day, a Thursday, unremarkable in every other respect, he appeared at the door of the study at noon and said, without preface, "Your Grace, I have served Caermont for 32 years. I served your father and I have served you, and I do not speak on matters that are not my place. But the kitchen inventory will need to be reviewed by the end of the week, and the housekeeper has been waiting 3 days for authorization on the spring linen order. And there are 4 outstanding letters to the charitable trust that require a signature before the month closes." He paused. "Her Grace managed all of this before it reached your desk," Penwith said. "It reached your desk in a form you could sign in 3 minutes. It has not been reaching your desk in that form, because she is not here to prepare it," Aldrich said. "Yes, Your Grace." Penwith's voice was without judgment, or perhaps it was so full of judgment that it had gone clean through the other side and come out as fact. "Because she is not here," he withdrew. Aldrich looked at the pile on the left side of his desk, the uncategorized, unvetted, unmanaged pile that had been growing since the morning he found the 8-word letter at the center of his blotter. He picked up the top item. It was an invoice from the Caermont Glazier for the East Wing window repair, which he had not known was in progress, annotated in Sarin's hand with a margin note reading, "Approved, see estate budget line 4CS. She had approved it before she left. She had processed it and annotated it and placed it in the outgoing correspondence. It had then been put in the wrong pile in the confusion of the days that followed. She had been working, Aldrich understood, right up until she packed. She had been ensuring the estate would not collapse immediately. She had done it without telling him she was doing it. She had seen to the practical consequence of her own departure before she left, as she had always, in all things, seen to the practical consequences of everything. He sat with that for a long time. She had told him she released him from his convenience, and then she had made her departure as uninconvenient for the estate as she possibly could. He did not know whether to find that devastating or extraordinary. He found it both. He rode to Bath on the 23rd day. He had not sent word ahead. He had, in fact, argued with himself for the full 23 days about whether sending word was the correct approach, decided it was not, changed his mind twice, and arrived at Lady Isolde Thalwick's house on the Crescent without announcement on a grey Tuesday morning, on horseback because the carriage felt wrong, and stood at the front door and knocked. Lady Isolde answered it herself. He suspected she had seen him from the upstairs window. She was 55 years old, and she had the look of a woman who had already decided everything she needed to decide about a situation and was simply waiting for the relevant party to arrive so she could communicate her conclusions efficiently. She was wearing a blue morning dress, and she had her reading spectacles pushed up on her head, which gave her the look of a person who had been interrupted in something important by someone she had expected to have better timing. She looked at him. She did not invite him in. "Lady Thalwick," he said, "I would like to see my wife." "I know what you would like," Lady Isolde said. "She is here. She is not available. I am not asking for a great deal of her time." Lady Isolde regarded him with the patience of a woman who has spent 30 years being told by men that they are not asking for a great deal. "You are asking for a conversation with a woman who arrived at my door in the early morning hours of a March Wednesday without prior notice, with one trunk and the clothes she had traveled in, and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours without speaking before she said the word, your name said aloud. And I sat with her for those 2 hours without asking her a single question, because I know my daughter, and I know that she does not say things until she has decided they are worth saying. And when she did say your name, she said it the way a person says the name of something they have finally set down after carrying it a very long way. She looked at him steadily. "She is well. She is resting. She is my daughter, and I would ask you to go home and send a letter if you have something worth saying, and I will present it to her, and she will decide whether she wishes to receive it. That is my answer." She began to close the door. "Lady Thalwick," his voice came out with more difficulty than he intended. "I understand what I said at the Pempton dinner." She stopped. She looked at him through the narrowing gap of the door. "Do you?" she said. He opened his mouth. "Because I would like to tell you what that word cost her, Lady Isolde Solde. Not in this doorway. I have no interest in scenes on public streets. But I will tell you this much. Sarin has asked nothing of this world for 30 years. Nothing that I know of. She is the kind of woman who asks nothing. I taught her that. I told her at 16 that women who ask are women who are refused, and she believed me, and she spent 4 years in your house, and never asked you once to see her. And you?" Her voice did not waver. "Did not see her without being asked." The door closed. He stood on the steps of the Crescent House for a moment. The bath traffic moved behind him. A dog crossed the street. A woman with a basket nodded as she passed. He rode back to Caermont. He sat in the kitchen garden that evening. It was the garden Sarin had designed and planted in the 2nd year of their marriage, and it was now in its March state. The beds turned and beginning to stir with the first low green of the season, the lavender stubble along the south wall just putting out its new growth, the rosemary thick and fragrant at the corners. He sat on the stone bench at the center of it and looked at all of it. He had walked through this garden for 3 years. He had never sat in it. Penwith found him there as the light went. The butler stood at the garden gate and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She planted the lavender the week she arrived at Caermont." Aldrich looked at the lavender. "The garden was gravel when her grace came," Penwith said. "Kitchen garden plots, serviceable, nothing more. She had it redesigned over the first winter. She worked with the head gardener herself. He has told me she came out in all weathers. I did not know that." "No, your grace." A pause. "There is a great deal you did not know. I believe that is the difficulty." Penwith returned to the house. Aldrich stayed in the garden until the last of the light was gone, and the lavender was only a grey shape in the dark, and the evening smelled of rosemary and cold earth, and the particular March scent of something beginning. Miss Orvine brought the drawings to him on a Friday. She carried them in a paper folder tied with a blue ribbon. Crispin's ribbon, Aldrich realized from his boots, and set them on the study desk with the same understated deliberateness with which she did all things. "Lord Crispin has been drawing extensively this week," she said. "I thought your grace might wish to see." She did not wait for an invitation. She opened the folder, spread the drawings across the desk surface, and stepped back. There were 11 of them. Crispin drew with tremendous confidence for a 5-year-old, large figures with solid outlines and expressions communicated primarily through the angle of the eyebrows, which he rendered in heavy, emphatic strokes. He favored blue for his father and green for his mother, which Aldrich thought he understood. He did wear a great deal of blue, and Sarin's garden dresses were green, the ones she wore in the mornings when she came down early. In 7 of the drawings, both figures were present. The tall blue figure and the smaller green figure stood beside each other at a table, in a garden, beside a body of water that was Crispin's interpretation of the Caermont lake. In those 7 drawings, both figures had faces, mouths curved upward, eyes that were 2 confident dots above a horizontal line of eyebrows. In 4 of the drawings, only the blue figure appeared. In those 4 drawings, the blue figure had no face at all, no eyes, no mouth, no expression, just the body, tall and outlined in blue, standing in the drawing space without a face, like a coat hung on a peg. Aldrich looked at the faceless drawings for a long time. "He does not mean it as a criticism," Miss Orvine said quietly. "I believe he simply doesn't know how to draw your face without her grace in the picture." She collected the drawings, replaced them in the folder, and left. He sat at the desk for 20 minutes after she had gone. Then he stood, found his coat, and went out to the garden. He walked through it slowly, in the late afternoon light. He looked at the lavender and the rosemary and the kitchen beds beginning to come in, and the climbing rose on the garden gate that was just putting out the first red tips of the season. And he thought about a 5-year-old who had drawn his father's face 11 times and had only been able to see it when there was a green figure standing beside the blue. He had Crispin's letter from Sarin read to him that night, before bed. Crispin brought it and sat on the edge of the bed and held the paper himself, and Aldrich sat beside him and listened to Miss Orvine read it. The letter was warm and specific. It mentioned the particular cookie Crispin liked, and asked whether the kitchen cat had yet produced her spring litter, and told him 3 facts about Bath that she thought he would find interesting, one of which was about the Roman pipes beneath the city that still carried water, because she knew he loved anything that had been underground for a long time. The letter had been written to delight a specific child, not a child, Crispe. She had written it thinking about Crispin as himself, not as a child in general. He had not known she thought of Crispin that way. He had thought of Crispin, he realized, with something cold and precise settling in his chest, primarily as his son, his heir, his succession. Not as a boy who was interested in underground pipes and kitchen cats, and had memorized the story of the fisherman and the tide, because it had a dog in it. He knew that now because he had been putting him to bed for 23 days, and had been required, for the first time, to pay attention. The following week, his solicitor Mr. Caverley arrived from London on estate business, and stayed for dinner. Caverley was the only man Aldrich trusted with candid conversation. He had been at school with him, and had watched him become a duke, and had decided, very early, that the most useful thing he could offer a man of Aldrich's temperament was the honest assessment that no one else in the room would give. Over the port, Caverley said, "I heard something in London last week." "What?" "Lord Fenwick Grays has been calling at the Crescent House in Bath." He watched Aldrich's face. "3 times in the past fortnight. Socially, as far as anyone can tell, he and Lady Thalwick are on pleasant terms. He has known Sarin since before your marriage." Aldrich was quiet. "I am telling you," Caverley said, "not to alarm you, but because I think you should know, and I believe you are a man who makes better decisions when he has all the available information." Aldrich set down his glass. He looked at the fire. Lord Fenwick Grays. He knew him by sight and by reputation. A quiet, careful man, prosperous, no title higher than lord, but old money and older name, and a reputation for being, according to everyone who had mentioned him, genuinely decent. He had been in the same circles as Sarin's family before her marriage. He had, Aldrich now recalled, with the particular precision that comes when a memory is urgently relevant, attended the assembly at Bath the summer before Sarin's engagement to Aldrich was announced, and had danced with her twice. He had thought nothing of it at the time. He had not yet been paying attention. "What do you intend?" Caverley asked. "I intend to go to Bath again," Aldrich said. "And say what?" Aldrich looked at the fire for a moment. Then he looked at Caverley. And for the first time in their long acquaintance, Aldrich, Duke of Caermont, said something that was not a statement or a conclusion or a plan. "I don't know yet," he said. Caverley looked at him carefully. "Then don't go yet," he said. "Go when you know, if your heart is in your throat right now." "Good. That means this story is working exactly the way a great Duke romance should work. We are just past the halfway point, and Aldrich has not yet found his answer. Sarin is in Bath. Lord Grays is calling. Crispin is drawing his father without a face, and the question is still unanswered. Before we continue, if you are watching on YouTube right now, and you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment below telling us, do you think Aldrich can find his way back to her? We read every single comment on Duke Royal Tales. Your voice matters to us. Now, back to Caermont. Back to the kitchen garden in the spring rain. Back to a Duke who is finally, at considerable cost, beginning to learn how to see. He went to Bath again in the 5th week. This time, Lady Isolde admitted him to the front sitting room. She did not bring Sarin. She sat across from him in the good chair by the window and folded her hands and said, "You may have 10 minutes. Tell me what you have come to say, and I will decide whether to carry it to my daughter." He told her, not eloquently, he was not, by nature, an eloquent man, and he had the honesty not to attempt it now. He told her he had found the tenant fund ledger and the charitable trust correspondence, and the 3 years of margin notes in pencil that told him things about the Caermont farms he had not known. He told her about Crispin's drawings and the faceless blue figure. He told her he had been sleeping badly and eating methodically and walking the kitchen garden in the evenings, and that he had found, somewhere in the lavender beds, the understanding that he had been living beside an architect for 4 years and had mistaken the building for something that had simply grown. He stopped. Lady Isolde looked at him steadily. "That is not enough," she said. "I know," he said. She tilted her head slightly. The expression on her face was not softening, exactly, but it was shifting, the way stone shifts when water has been running over it for long enough. "I know it is not enough," Aldrich said. I know she built everything I have named, and I am grateful for it. But I understand now why she left. Not because of the word, because of what the word confirmed, that I saw the estate and not her." He paused. The word was true, and that is the part I cannot undo with an apology. I can only undo it by answering the question I failed to answer before she left. "What question is that?" Lady Isolde asked carefully. "She asked nothing of me in 4 years. She has asked nothing of me now. But if she did ask, if she asked me to tell her who she is, separate from what she does, I could not have answered it 5 weeks ago. I am not certain I can answer it now. But I am trying to be able to." Lady Isolde was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and went to the door and called into the hall, and Aldrich heard footsteps on the stairs, and then the door of the sitting room opened, and Sarin came in. She was wearing a dress he did not recognize, pale gray-green, the color of lichen on stone. Her hair was arranged differently from how she wore it at Caermont, simpler, pulled back without the additional pins she used for the estate. She looked, he thought, not diminished, but more herself, the way a building looks more itself when you clear away the scaffolding. She looked at him without surprise. She had known he was there. "You may have 20 minutes, Lady Isolde said to the room, and left. Sarin did not sit. She stood with her back to the window and her arms at her sides and waited. "I have not come to ask you to return," Aldrich said. She was quiet. "I have come to ask you a question," he said, "and I want you to know I am asking it for myself, not for Caermont and not for Crispin. For myself, because I believe it is the right question and I have not been asking the right questions." Sarin watched him. "Who are you?" he said. "Not the Duchess, not Crispin's mother. Not the woman who managed my estate and my correspondence and planted my kitchen garden. Who is Sarin, standing in this room?" She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face, not surprise, not hurt, but the particular expression of a person who has waited a very long time to be asked a question and is not entirely certain, now that it has been asked, how to begin. "That is the correct question," she said finally. "I know, but I am not going to answer it for you," she said. "You can find me, Aldrich. I have been here for 4 years. Go and find me. Come back when you have. And if you can tell me 3 things that are purely mine, not the estate, not Crispin, not the household, I will listen to what you have to say." He stood. "3 things," he said. "3 things." She held his gaze. "Mine." He left the sitting room. Lady Isolde was in the hall, conspicuously occupied with a letter she had appeared to have been reading for some time. He thanked her. He went out into the Bath Street and stood in the spring afternoon and looked up at the honey-colored stone of the crescent houses and the pale sky above them. 3 things. He rode back to Caermont. He began, for the first time in his adult life, to pay attention to something other than what he was building. He began with the observable. He walked through every room of Caermont with the notebook he used for estate calculations and wrote down the things that were hers, not the things she had done. Not the fund ledger and the charitable trust and the correspondence, but the choices that were personal and particular and had no practical explanation. The East sitting room, a small watercolor above the writing desk, a village streak in a style he did not recognize, done in the confident hand of someone who paints seriously and not for show. He had never asked about it. He had walked past it 400 times. The library. 7 books shelved out of the general alphabetical order, grouped separately, their spines turned slightly outward, not randomly. 7 books in a cluster. He pulled them down one by one and looked at them. 5 novels, 1 collection of letters between a naturalist and a botanist, published in the last decade, and a very old volume of Welsh poetry with a cracked spine and a handwritten inscription on the inside cover in handwriting that was not Sarin's but was recognizably feminine and old. "To my brightest girl, may she always know the difference between a verse and a poem." Nain. He did not know what Nain meant. He made a note to find out. He later learned it was Welsh for grandmother. He went to Miss Orvine. He sat across from her in the schoolroom while Crispin was at his afternoon rest, and said, simply, "Tell me something about her Grace that is not about this house or Crispin." Miss Orvine looked at him with the careful expression of a woman deciding whether to trust the question. "She reads aloud to herself when she is alone," Miss Orvine said at last. "Not books. She reads her letters aloud, before she replies to them. She says she cannot hear if a letter is right until she has spoken it." A pause. "She told me that once when I came in and found her at it. She was not embarrassed. She said it was the only way she could think clearly, reading it aloud. He wrote that in his notebook. He went to Crispin. He sat beside him after dinner, before bed, and said, "Tell me something about Mama, something you know about her that you think I might not know." Crispin considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old who has been asked a question he believes has a correct answer. "Mama doesn't like thunder," Crispin said, "but she always comes into my room when there is thunder, and she says it's to check on me. But I know it's because she doesn't like it, because she stays until it's gone, and then she stays a bit more, and she thinks I'm asleep." He wrote that in his notebook. He went to the head gardener, Tressel. He found him in the kitchen garden in the early morning, and stood in the lavender beds, and said, "When Her Grace was working with you on the garden design, was there something she wanted that she didn't put in?" Tressel paused his work. He was a man of 60 who had the weathered patience of someone who had spent 4 decades watching things grow and had stopped being surprised by what grew and what didn't. "She wanted a quince tree," Tressel said. "There's an old one in the east orchard. She came and looked at it 3 times in the first year. She wanted to take a cutting and grow a second one near the kitchen garden. She looked up the method herself, brought me the paper." "Why didn't she do it?" Tressel picked up his shears. "She said you had mentioned the east orchard was going to be cleared for drainage that year. She didn't want to start something that would be moved." He paused. "The orchard wasn't cleared in the end. The drainage was rerouted. She never said anything more about the quince." Aldrich looked at the space beside the kitchen garden gate where a tree might stand. It was a good space for a tree. He wrote it in his notebook. He went to Caverley by letter and wrote out his observations, not to share them, but because writing things down had always been how he sorted them into meaning. And somewhere in the writing, sitting at his desk on a Thursday evening in April with the notebook open and Crispin's drawings in the folder beside it, and the Welsh poetry book with the cracked spine on the corner of the blotter, it arrived, not as a revelation, not as a feeling, as a fact, the kind he could follow from its beginning to its end. She read letters aloud to hear if they were right. She had grown up with a grandmother who gave her Welsh poetry and wrote in books. She had known the word nain while he had needed to look it up. She did not like thunder, but she went toward it when Crispin needed her. She had wanted a quince tree for 4 years and had not planted it because she made space for everyone. She had been making space her whole life. She had made herself small enough to fit beside a man who had never once made space for her. He closed the notebook. He sat for a moment. Then he went to the garden gate, and he stood where the quince tree was not, and he looked at the space for a long time. He rode to Bath the next morning before 7. He did not stop to send word ahead. He arrived at the Crescent House as the Bath church bells were striking 9, and he knocked and Lady Isolde answered, and this time, something in his face, he thought, must have communicated itself. She stepped back and simply said, "She is at the bookshop, Milner's on the High Street. She goes on Thursdays." He thanked her. He found the bookshop. Milner's books occupied a narrow shop between a tea room and a printer on the High Street, and it had the smell of all good bookshops, paper and dust and the particular stillness of a place where people come to be alone without being lonely. A bell rang when he pushed the door open. A clerk behind the counter looked up, noted a duke's coat, and said nothing. Aldrich moved through the front room into the second room beyond it, which was narrower and lined floor to ceiling with shelves, lit by a single tall window at the far end, through which the April morning was coming in clean and gold. Sarin was standing at the far shelves. She had a book in her hands, open, and she was reading. She was entirely still, the way she was always entirely still when she was reading, the way he had observed across 4 years and filed under the category of Sarin reading, without ever examining what the stillness meant. He stood at the entrance of the room. She had not heard him come in. He watched her for a moment. She turned a page. She turned it with the particular attentiveness of someone reading something that is holding them completely. And then, without putting the book down, she reached out with her right hand and felt along the shelf beside her until she found the book she wanted, pulled it free, and opened immediately to the last page. She read the last page first. He had known this. He had not known why. She closed it. She replaced it. She opened a different one. "Sarin," he said. She turned. She was not startled. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been expecting something to arrive and was now measuring whether it had arrived correctly. "You are at Milner's on Thursdays," he said. "You have been at Milner's on Thursdays since before I knew you." She was quiet. He stepped into the room. Your grandmother gave you the Welsh poetry book with the cracked spine when you were young. She called you her brightest girl. You call her Nain. That is Welsh. You have 7 books shelved separately in the Caermont library. The Welsh poetry is one, and they are not shelved in the general order because they are not part of the general collection. They are yours. They were yours before you came to Caermont. Seren set down the book in her hand. You read letters aloud before you reply to them, he said. Because you cannot hear if they are right until you have spoken to them, Miss Orvine told me. She told me because I asked, not to catch you in anything, but because I needed to know something that was purely yours. You do not know you do it aloud. You think of it as reading, but you speak the words. He moved a step closer. She did not step back. You do not like thunder. His voice was quieter now. You have not liked it since before we married. I do not know why. You have never told me and I have never asked, and that is a failure I intend to account for if you will let me. But every time there has been thunder at Caermont at night, you have gone to Crispin's room. Not to settle him. He told me himself that he knows. He knows it is you who needs settling, and he lets you stay. He is 5 years old, and he has been protecting you from thunder for 2 years. Something moved in Seren's face, something that was not quite composed. And you wanted a quince tree, Aldrich said. In the space beside the kitchen garden gate. You looked up the cutting method yourself. You brought trestle the paper. You did not plant it, because you thought the east orchard was going to be cleared, and you did not want to begin something that would be in the way. He stopped. The orchard was not cleared. The drainage was rerouted. The space beside the gate has been empty for 4 years, because you made room for a plan that changed and never reclaimed the space for yourself. He stood still. That is you, he said. The grandmother's voice and the bookshop on Thursdays and the letters you read aloud and the thunder and the quince tree you did not plant because you did not want to be in the way. That is not the Duchess. That is not Crispin's mother. That is you. And I am standing in this room telling you these things because I was a man who had all of it in front of him for 4 years and called it furniture, and I will not do it again. I will not do it again because I understand now what I had and what I said, and I understand the full weight of both. He did not reach for her hand. He did not move toward her. He stood in Milner's bookshop in the April light and let the silence after his words settle, and he waited, because he had learned, somewhere in the kitchen garden and the plant ledger and Crispin's faceless drawings, that waiting was the beginning of seeing. And seeing was what he had not done for 4 years. Sarin was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed the distance between them. Not tentatively. Not slowly. She crossed the narrow space of the bookshop room in 3 steps, and she took his face in both her hands, and she looked at him directly. At close range, in the way she had never looked at him before, not because she had not wanted to, but because he had never been still enough, had never been present enough, had never made himself available to be looked at. He was still now. The thunder, she said, started the year my father died. A storm the night he died. I sat with my mother in the kitchen until morning and the thunder was continuous. I have not been able to sit through thunder alone since. A pause. Now you know why. Now I know, he said. She lowered her hands from his face. She did not step away. The quince tree, she said, was my grandmother's. She had one in her garden in Wales. I used to climb it when I was small. She made jam from it every September and let me stir the pot. When she died, I thought... She stopped. She began again. I thought if I had one at Caermont, it would be near enough to something I had lost that I could bear the distance from it. Then we will plant it, Aldrich said. Trestle has the cutting method. We will plant it this spring, before it is too late in the season. Sarin looked at him for a moment. Her eyes were bright, not tears, or not only tears, something brighter than that. The brightness of a person who has been very careful for a very long time, and has now arrived somewhere that might, possibly, be safe enough to be less so. If I come back, she said, it will be different. Yes, I will ask for things, she said. I will not manage the estate in silence and expect recognition to accumulate. I will ask, and you will need to hear the asking, not as inconvenient, as... She paused, searching for the word. As for communication, he said, between 2 people who live in the same house. Between 2 people who intend to know each other, she said. That is what I mean. He held her gaze. That is what I intend, he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned and replaced the book on the shelf, straightening its spine with the automatic care she gave to all things, and picked up her coat from the chair where she had left it, and walked to the bookshop door. At the threshold she stopped and looked back. "You may ride back with me," she said. "I have the carriage today. There is room." He followed her out into the April street. It was not simple after that. He had not expected it to be, and she had not offered that it would be. There was a fortnight at Lady Isolde's house while Sarin arranged the terms of her return in her own mind, and 2 letters exchanged that Aldrich wrote and rewrote more times than he had rewritten anything in his adult life. There was a conversation conducted through the sitting-room door one afternoon, his voice on one side of it and hers on the other, that was not comfortable and not resolved, and was none the less the most real conversation he could remember having with her. She asked him, through the door, what he believed she was to him, not in the household, not in the estate, to him. He sat on his side of the door and thought about it honestly, and said, "The person whose absence has shown me that I was not living fully on my own side of the door, that I was managing my life the way I managed my estate, efficiently, and without feeling and calling it sufficient." He paused. "That is what I believe you are to me. You are proof that there is a difference between a well-run life and a life." A silence from her side of the door. "That," she said, "is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. I intend to make a habit of it." Another silence. "We will see," she said. But her voice was different, not warm yet, not all the way, but moving. She returned to Caermont on the first morning of May, which was a Thursday, which was her day. Which was her day. Penwith had the house in order. Crispin had been told his mother was coming home in the morning and had, according to Miss Orvine's later account, woken at 5 and sat on the nursery window seat, watching the drive until the carriage appeared. When it did, he had descended the stairs at a speed that Miss Orvine characterized as not entirely safe, and appeared at the front door before Penwith had it fully open. Sarin came up the front steps, and Crispin met her at the top of them, and whatever transpired in that moment was between a mother and a 5-year-old, and was not for anyone else's ledger. Aldrich was standing in the kitchen garden. He had gone there early, before the carriage was due, not to avoid the arrival, but because he understood by now that the kitchen garden was the most honest place on the Caermont estate. It was the place where her presence was built into the ground itself, where every spring was hers before it was the season's, and it was the right place to be when she came home. He heard her boots on the garden path, the left heel slightly worn, the sound he had catalogued over weeks of absence, and would never stop noticing now, and he turned. She was wearing green, a dress he recognized from the early years of their marriage, and she had her coat over her arm, and her hair wind-loosened from the carriage, and she looked exactly as she had always looked, and nothing like he had ever seen her before. She looked, at last, at a man who was looking back. She stopped when she reached the kitchen garden gate. She looked at the space beside it, the space that had been empty for 4 years, and her hand went to the gatepost. There was a young quince tree in the space beside the gate, small, carefully staked, just at the beginning of its first spring leafing. Tressel had planted it 3 days prior following Aldrich's instructions. It was not yet the tree she remembered. It would not be that tree for years, but it was the beginning of one, and it was in the space she had made and never reclaimed, and it was there because he had listened. Sarin stood at the gate and looked at the tree for a long moment. She did not speak immediately. She was reading the gesture, the way she read her letters aloud, not to perform her feelings, but to hear if it was right, and when she heard it, she turned to him. "You planted it," she said. "Tressel planted it. I gave him the paper." He paused. "You had already done the research. I only had to act on it." The corner of her mouth moved. It was not a full smile yet. It was the beginning of one. But it was hers, and it was real, and it was directed at him without reservation, and that was more than he had known how to receive for the 4 years he had not been paying attention. She pushed open the garden gate and came in. She stopped beside him, close, looking at the young quince tree with the spring light on it, and the first pale leaves just beginning to open, and she said, without looking at him, "I will ask for things. I know, and you will hear them." "I am practicing," he said. It was as honest as he could be. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, not tentatively, not as a concession, but with the full deliberate grip of a person taking hold of something they have decided to keep, and kept her eyes on the quince tree and said, "Then we will grow something." The kitchen garden in May smelled of rosemary and earth and the green scent of new growth. The quince tree caught the morning light. Above the gate, The climbing rose on the arbor was putting out its first buds. Saren's grip on his hand was firm and certain, the way she was certain about most things once she had decided them. He stood beside her in the garden she had built, and he looked at what she had made of this place, and he understood what she had said through the door, about the difference between a well-run life and a life. He understood what he had had for 4 years, and what he had called it, and what the correct word for it was, and had always been, if he had only known how to speak it. He knew how to speak it now. "Seren," he said. She turned to look at him. "I love you." The words were not formal and were not ornate. They were the words of a man who had spent 7 weeks finding them, and they were entirely his. "I loved you when you came to Caermont and turned the gravel garden into something that grows. I loved you when you wrote the margin notes in the tenant ledger that told me who the families were. I loved you when you went to Crispin in the Thunder and let him think it was for him. I have loved you every morning for 4 years, and I called it an arrangement, and I called it convenience, and I called it everything except what it was because I was not paying attention." He held her gaze. "I am paying attention now." Seren looked at him for a long time in the May morning light, and her expression moved through something complex and arrived, slowly, at something that was not yet forgiveness in its full form. Full forgiveness would take time, and she was a woman who gave things in their proper season, but was the beginning of it, the root of it, pressed into good ground. "Say it again," she said quietly. "I love you, Seren." She turned back to the quince tree. She did not release his hand. "My grandmother made jam in September," she said. "She let me stir the pot." "We'll do it here," he said, "when the tree is ready. It won't bear fruit for a few years. Then we have time to learn to do it properly." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and her voice was low and private and entirely her own, "I used to hum when I was happy." A pause. "Nain's melody." I stopped, sometime in the last 4 years. I did not notice I had stopped. He had not heard it at Caermont, he realized. He had not heard it since she left. He had been listening for it without knowing that was what he was doing. Then start again," he said. She did not answer immediately. She stood in the kitchen garden with her hand in his in the quince tree in the spring light, and after a moment, very quietly, barely audible, the way it had once traveled through rooms she thought were empty, and into the study where he was working, and into the part of him he had not known how to name, she began to hum, Nain's melody, the one he had not been able to find in 4 years, and had not known he was missing, the one that had been in the house every morning, and had been the sound of her, living in it, quietly, entirely herself, building something no one had thought to ask for and everyone had needed. He stood beside her and listened. The kitchen garden moved gently in the May air. The quince tree held its new leaves up to the light, as young things do, patient and unhurried, growing at exactly the rate it was meant to grow. And the house behind them, Caermont, 12 rooms of history, and 2 floors of rebuilt ceilings and 32 years of Penwith service, and 4 years of Saren's margin notes, and a kitchen door that now opened every morning at 6, was, for the first time in the memory of anyone in it, completely, entirely, the right sound. In September, the quince tree did not yet bear fruit. It was, as Trestle had told them, a matter of years. But it was growing. It had taken to the garden gate position the way things take to soil that has been made ready for them by careful hands, and by September it was tall enough that Crispin could reach the lowest branch when he stood on his toes, which he did every morning when he passed it on the way to the kitchen, as though checking that it had grown overnight. He told Miss Orvine it was his tree. Miss Orvine did not correct him. She told Seren, who smiled and did not correct him either. The tenant fund meeting happened in October. Aldrich attended for the first time. He sat beside Sarin at the table and listened and said nothing for the first 40 minutes, because he was learning the shape of something she had built without him, and interrupting the shape would not help him learn it. Afterward, walking back through the kitchen garden, he asked her to explain 2 items from the meeting that he had not fully followed. She explained them without shortening herself, without making herself easy. She spoke to him as a person con, who expected to be followed. He followed. At the November dinner, the first large dinner at Caermont since her return, Lord Ashfield was present. He arrived with his wife and made the circuit of the room with the ease of a man comfortable at country dinners, and stopped to greet Aldrich with the careless friendliness that had always characterized their acquaintance. "Your Duchess," Ashfield said, nodding towards Seren across the room, where she stood in conversation with 2 neighbors with the complete attention she gave to everyone. Most capable woman I've ever seen manage a room. You're a lucky man, Caermont. Aldrich looked at Sarin. She was listening to something Mrs. Porthen was saying. He saw the particular tilt of her head that meant she was genuinely interested, and she had not heard the compliment. She was not performing for the room. She was in it. Yes, Aldrich said. And then, because Ashfield had asked a similar question once, and received a careless answer that had traveled 3 weeks down the road and cost more than Aldrich had known he had to spend. She is the most extraordinary person I know. She was the most extraordinary person I knew 4 years ago. I had not yet learned to see it. Ashfield looked at him with mild surprise. Learned that from experience, did you? Ashfield said. The hard kind, Aldrich said. The only kind that stays. He crossed the room and stood beside Sarin, and she turned and looked at him. The look she gave him now, which was different from every look she had given him before her departure, because it was the look of a woman who has been seen and knows it. And Mrs. Porthen, who had started this whole story without entirely meaning to, smiled to herself and found no guilt in the smile at all. The dinner was, by general agreement, the finest Caermont had hosted in years. At midnight, when the last carriage had gone and the house was quiet, Sarin stood in the kitchen garden in her evening dress, with her coat over her shoulders, looking at the quince tree in the dark. Aldrich came and stood beside her. They did not speak for a moment. The night was cold and still, and the Caermont stars were very clear. Do you know, Sarin said, what the Welsh word for quince is? No, he said. Sea winds, she said. It sounds almost the same. Nain said the English borrowed it from us. Did they? Everything good was borrowed from someone, she said. She was almost smiling. He reached for her hand. She gave it without hesitation, the full certain grip. The quince tree stood in the dark at the garden gate, small and young and entirely rooted, already belonging exactly where it had been planted. And in the house behind them, every room was right. And there it is, the story of Aldrich and Sarin, a duke who had everything and could not see the most valuable thing in any of his rooms, and the woman who built a garden inside a house that never quite knew how to name what she was planting. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you, if you found yourself whispering "say it again" along with Sarin, then this channel was made for you. Duke Royal Tales is where the finest Duke romance stories live. Every single week, we bring you new stories of love found, lost and earned back, stories with depth, with feeling, with the kind of writing that sits with you long after the screen goes dark. So here is what we need from you right now. Subscribe to Duke Royal Tales if you haven't already. Hit the like button. It takes 1 second, and it tells us to keep making stories like this one. Leave a comment below and tell us, which moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it the 8 words on the desk, Crispin's faceless drawings, the bookshop, or the quince tree? And share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because some stories are too good to watch alone. We will see you in the next one, right here, at Duke Royal Tales.